Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. He asked me for a small favor, but it wasn't small. At least, not for me. When I think back now, I realize that what started as something ordinary became a turning point in my life, one that carried far more weight than I ever expected. It was late afternoon when I first heard the knock on my door. I wasn't expecting company, and I nearly ignored it, thinking it might be someone selling something or dropping off a flyer. But when I peeked through the curtain, I saw him standing there, my neighbor, Daniel. He had lived across the street for years, a widower in his 60s, quiet, respectful, always with a nod when we crossed paths. We weren't close, but we had a polite kind of familiarity that neighbors often shared. I opened the door and noticed right away that something about his expression was different. He wasn't his usual composed self. There was a tightness in his shoulders, a hesitation in the way he held his hat in his hands. I smiled and asked if everything was all right. He said, "I know this might sound strange, but could I ask you for a small favor?" I told him of course, not knowing then how much that one word yes would shift things inside me. The favor, as he explained it, was simple enough. He had a letter, handwritten and sealed, that he wanted me to read. Not because he couldn't read it himself, he had already done so, but because he wanted another voice to bring the words alive. It had been written years ago by his late wife, tucked away in a box he had only recently found while cleaning the attic. He didn't say it outright, but I could feel it. He wasn't asking me to just read, he was asking me to sit with him in a space of memory, of grief, and maybe of love. I invited him in, made tea, and we sat in my living room. I held the envelope in my hands, the paper worn soft from time. For a moment I hesitated. It felt like holding someone's heart. I looked at him, and he gave me a small nod, as if to say, "Go on." The words on the page were tender and filled with the kind of everyday love that lasts long after someone is gone. She had written about the way he used to hum when he shaved, the way he always fixed her chair before she sat at the table, the way she hoped he'd never forget to water the roses after she was gone. My voice trembled as I read, but I kept going, word by word, sentence by sentence. I could feel his silence beside me, not heavy, but present, like a companion to the words themselves. When I finished, I looked at him. His eyes were wet, but he didn't cry. He just sat there, breathing slow, as though each memory needed space to pass through him. I felt my own throat tighten, not just out of sympathy but from the weight of realizing how deep love can root itself in someone's life. He thanked me softly, his voice almost breaking. "I couldn't have done that alone," he said. And I understood then, the favor wasn't small, because it wasn't about reading words. It was about carrying something with him, even for just a moment. As he left that evening, he looked a little lighter, though his steps were still slow. I closed the door and sat in the quiet, the teacups still warm on the table. I thought about what it means to be needed, not for chores or errands, but in the sacred way of being trusted with someone's most vulnerable parts. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Daniel, about the letter, about the way his wife had written those simple, beautiful words. And I wondered if I had ever let anyone know me so well, if I had ever given someone the gift of words that could outlast me. What I didn't know then was that this was only the beginning, the start of something that would pull me into a journey of connection, of discovery, and of a kind of companionship I hadn't expected to find at this point in my life. After that evening, I thought perhaps things would go back to normal, a polite wave across the street, a shared nod when we passed each other. But that wasn't what happened. A few days later, there was another knock at my door. I opened it to find Daniel again, standing a little uncertainly, as though he wasn't sure if he was intruding. He had something folded under his arm, and I noticed right away it was a photo album. "I was wondering," he said quietly, "if you'd sit with me again. Just for a while." I hesitated for only a second, then stepped aside. Something inside me felt that he wasn't just asking for company, he was offering me a window into his life, into pieces of himself that he hadn't shared with anyone in a long time. We sat at the same table where we had shared tea before. He placed the album between us, the leather cover worn and cracked from years of use. I opened the first page, and there she was, his wife, smiling in a way that made you believe the world was gentler back then. Her eyes had that unmistakable spark of a woman who knew she was loved and who loved back just as fiercely. He told me stories as we turned the pages: their first house, the trip they took to the coast, the garden they planted together. His voice would rise with warmth at one picture, then soften into silence at the next. I listened, not just to the words but to the pauses between them. Those pauses said as much as the stories themselves. At one point, he stopped on a photograph of the two of them sitting on a park bench, his arm around her shoulder. He didn't speak right away, just looked at it, his finger tracing the edge of the image. "That was the day we promised we'd grow old together," he finally said. His words trembled, but there was a steadiness beneath them, like he had carried that memory with him every single day. I felt a heaviness in my chest, not just because of the love he had lost, but because of the way he still carried it so faithfully. It made me think of my own life, of the choices I had made, the people I had let slip away, the moments I had perhaps taken for granted. Sitting there, I realized that sometimes the greatest gift isn't in speaking but in listening, in letting someone else's memories find a safe place to land. As the afternoon stretched into evening, I noticed something shift between us. It wasn't romantic, not in the way people often assume. It was something deeper, rooted in mutual respect and quiet understanding. He trusted me with his most treasured memories, and in return, I found myself opening pieces of my own life that I rarely shared. I told him about my children, about the loneliness that had crept into my evenings since they had grown and built lives of their own. I admitted that sometimes the silence of my house felt too large, too empty. He listened the way I had listened to him, his eyes steady, kind, and without judgment. There was no rush to fill the space with words. Just the comfort of knowing we weren't alone in what we carried. By the time he left that night, the photo album carefully tucked back under his arm, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and peace. Sorrow for the losses we both had endured, but peace in the knowledge that maybe, just maybe, those burdens didn't have to be carried alone anymore. When I closed the door behind him, I leaned against it and let out a long breath. What had begun as a small favor was turning into something far larger than either of us expected. It was becoming a connection, fragile, unexpected, and profoundly human, and though I didn't fully understand it then, I could sense that life was quietly weaving our stories together in a way that neither of us had planned. The third time he came to my door, it was different. There was no letter, no album. Just Daniel standing there with his coat buttoned up, looking a little lost. "Would you walk with me?" he asked. It was evening, the sun already dipping behind the trees, the air cool and touched with the scent of damp leaves. I grabbed my sweater and joined him. We walked down the quiet street, our steps in rhythm, though neither of us spoke for a while. There was no rush to fill the silence. The crickets sang, and the street lamps flickered on one by one as if to guide us forward. Eventually, he began to talk. Not about his wife this time, but about himself. About the way loneliness presses in around the edges of a house once filled with laughter. About mornings that start with silence and nights that end the same way. He admitted something I hadn't expected, that sometimes he wondered what purpose he still served in the world, now that the one person who had shared his every thought was gone. I listened, and the honesty of it pierced me. Not because it was sad, but because it was brave. Few people are willing to let someone see the raw edges of their loneliness. I told him I understood, maybe not in the exact same way, but in my own way. My children were grown, and though they called, their lives were busy. I confessed that some nights, I sat in my kitchen with the radio on just so the house didn't feel so hollow. He turned to me then, his eyes catching the glow of the street lamp. "You get it," he said simply. And in that moment, I felt the truth of it settle between us like a bridge, not built of words, but of recognition. We walked further than I expected, down to the park near the edge of town. The benches were empty, the swings creaking softly in the evening breeze. We sat down, side by side, not touching, not needing to. The night carried a stillness that wrapped around us, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel restless in the silence. He spoke again, softer now. "That letter, when you read it, it made me realize something. I can't keep living only in the past. She wouldn't want that. But moving forward feels impossible when I don't know where forward is." I felt a lump rise in my throat. Because I knew that feeling. That sense of being caught between holding on and letting go. I told him what I had rarely admitted aloud, that sometimes, I too felt suspended, not quite belonging to the life I had, not quite knowing where to step next. He looked at me for a long time, not with pity, but with the kind of understanding that comes when two people discover they are not as alone as they once thought. Maybe forward isn't something we figure out all at once, he said. Maybe it's just walking together, one step at a time. The words lingered with me as we made our way back. By the time we reached my door, the night was quiet again, and neither of us needed to say much more. But I felt something different in my chest, a warmth, a sense of companionship I hadn't known I was missing. After he left, I stood at the window, watching him cross the street, his figure steady under the glow of the lamplight. And I thought to myself, what began as a favor had grown into something neither of us expected. It wasn't romance, not yet. It wasn't friendship, not quite in the usual sense either. It was a new language we were learning together, one made of shared silences, honest words, and the courage to simply keep walking. What I didn't realize then was that those walks, those conversations, would begin to change not only him, but me as well. Because sometimes, the greatest discoveries are not about another person at all, they're about the parts of yourself you uncover when you let someone else walk beside you. It was a Saturday afternoon when he knocked again, though this time I almost expected it. By then, our meetings had become part of my week, the letters, the photographs, the walks. Each time, I felt as though we were piecing together fragments of something larger, though neither of us could yet name it. He stood at my door holding a small wooden box. His hands trembled slightly as he carried it inside. We sat at the table where it all began, and he set the box between us. I want to share this with you, he said. But it's not easy for me. The lid creaked as he opened it, revealing a collection of keepsakes, pressed flowers wrapped in tissue, ticket stubs from concerts long past, a faded scarf that still carried the faintest trace of perfume. At the bottom lay a stack of letters, tied neatly with a ribbon. These were not the words of loss, but of life, notes his wife had written him during their years together. Some were playful, others tender, all of them soaked in the quiet intimacy of a life shared day by day. He asked me to read one aloud. As I unfolded the paper, I felt a weight settle in the room, not heavy, but sacred. The words danced with laughter and love, with promises made in the ordinary moments of life. She had written about dinner burning on the stove, about him fixing the leaky faucet, about how she couldn't wait for him to come home from work so they could sit on the porch together. When I finished, he closed his eyes and let out a long breath. She made even the smallest things feel important, he whispered. I looked at him then, and something inside me shifted. All these days, I had thought I was helping him carry his grief. But the truth was, he was teaching me, showing me what it meant to love fully, to see the sacred in the ordinary, to let someone's presence fill the empty corners of your heart. We sat in silence for a long time, the box open between us, memories spilling out like sunlight through a window. And then, quietly, he said, I don't want to live only in memory anymore. I want to start living again. I can't do it alone. But maybe, we don't have to. His words hung in the air, not rushed, not desperate, but honest. I felt tears well in my eyes, not out of sadness, but because I understood. Because I wanted that too. I reached across the table, not to take his hand, that would come later, but simply to rest mine on the wooden box. It was enough. A small gesture, but one that carried all the unspoken agreement between us. We didn't need to define what this was, not yet. It wasn't about labels. It was about choosing not to walk through the silence alone anymore. That evening, after he left, I lingered by the window again, watching the light fade from the street. I realized that the small favor he had asked of me had never really been small at all. It was an opening, a doorway into something larger, not just his healing, but mine too. And so here I am, telling you this story, years later. What started with a letter became a journey of trust, of companionship, of discovering that even in the later chapters of our lives, new beginnings are possible. We don't always choose when they arrive, or in what form. Sometimes they knock on your door with trembling hands and a quiet request. If I've learned anything, it's this: life rarely gives us what we expect, but if we are willing to listen, to walk, to share, it can still give us exactly what we need.